Good afternoon, if it's afternoon where you are. I'm Ranger Jen. I'm with the National Mall and Memorial Parks, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Got my friend Ranger Kevin from the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site on the line with us today. We are excited to bring you this presentation about the idea of independence revisited, looking at the idea of independence from different sides of the story here. We've got two pretty well-known characters in history, and we're gonna examine this question from both sides. Well, we're gonna make it a question, I guess. Maybe it's not exactly a question, but we'll make it a question. My first question, though, is for those of you on board here with us, if you wouldn't mind saying hi in the chat, letting us know where you're from, if you've got students with you, what age group we have. We'd like to be able to kind of cater our conversation to the age group that we have on with us. And we're going to use that chat box as a way to communicate. So if you have questions, feel free to throw those in the chat as well. And we'll either, get to them as they come, or at least we'll have time at the end. Oh, very good. Hagerstown, Maryland, Fredonia, New York. Awesome. We've got some different parts of the country represented here. Fifth graders. Oh, a bunch of fifth graders. Yay. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I should also say a quick thank you to our friends at the Trust for the National Mall. They're our partner in a lot here at the National Mall, and they've been great supporters of our education programs, giving us the opportunity to present programs like this to the public. And so we're really happy to work with them on this. And Gabby's been a great help in getting us set up here today. So we really appreciate it. I am going to start talking a little bit about my part of the story, which has to do with Thomas Jefferson and the whole idea of Thomas Jefferson and his work. I'm wondering if some of my fifth graders or any other students who are on the line could share with me in the chat anything they know about Thomas Jefferson. Anybody have anything they can share about what they know about Thomas Jefferson? I've got a picture up here of his memorial on the National Mall. It's on the tidal basin, and this happens to be a shot from peak cherry blossom time, where you can see all the pretty flowers and the trees. We could do a whole thing about cherry blossoms. I believe we have before. Maybe we'll do it again in the spring, but we've lots of different things we can talk about at the National Mall. Any info on Jefferson anybody has to share? You're gonna make me do all the work today, huh? Thought I would have some help. I wanted to see where we were coming from. I guess when I'm at the Jefferson Memorial and I'm talking to students there, I tend to kind of highlight some of the things that Jefferson himself wanted to be remembered for. And maybe it's just because I have a little fascination with grave sites and things, but Thomas Jefferson happened to write what he wanted to be remembered for on his own headstone. And he said there were three things he most wanted to be remembered for. One of them was writing the Declaration of Independence, which is what we're going to talk a lot about today. One was writing the statute for religious freedom for the state of Virginia. He thought it was really important that everybody should be able to go to whatever religious institution that they wanted to go to, that was a choice everybody should be able to make. And the third thing that he wanted to be remembered for was the founder of the University of Virginia. He thought education was really important. So nowhere in those three things do we come across the idea that he was once president of the United States. That was not one of the things he really wanted to be remembered for. The top three things: independence, religious freedom, and University of Virginia. So it's, of course, probably that top first thing he mentioned, the Declaration of Independence. That is what motivates the building of this Jefferson Memorial on the National Mall. And when we look at its sort of classical design, you might think it's older than it really is. Jefferson's memorial was a result of our 32nd president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who really wanted this memorial built. He was shocked when he came to DC and saw there wasn't a memorial to Thomas Jefferson and thought, wow, that's really unusual. We should do something about that. And he worked really hard to get this memorial built. So zooming in and checking it out a little bit closer, it's looking pretty good in this picture. There's been a lot of restoration work over the time that I've been here working on the National Mall. And here's a day when we took some students to visit, so you get the feel of walking up all those steps and going inside. The emphasis, though, when we talk about Thomas Jefferson is often on his writing. He was known as being the main writer of the Declaration of Independence. And if you can see this picture, maybe you can see something that a lot of people probably don't notice when they're busy heading up those memorial steps, is this piece of artwork right up here at the top. And this is representing the Declaration Committee, the group that was responsible for drafting the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson ended up doing the bulk of the work, but he was really part of a committee. I think we can get a little bit closer look there. Yeah, Jefferson standing up at the table there, and his friends, or his friends who made him do all the work anyway, are the ones who are sitting there kind of looking at him like he has something important to say. You might recognize Benjamin Franklin on the far left. John Adams is the next one over. Jefferson in the center. And then Robert Livingston and Roger Sherman, who are also part of the committee. Jefferson's going to do most of the writing. He's going to ask a little input and some editing suggestions, perhaps from some of his friends. He's going to get the credit for doing a lot of the work on this Declaration of Independence. And if you're not really familiar what this document is all about, it's the thing that separates us, or is meant to explain the separation of why we didn't want to be part of Great Britain back in the 1770s. This is what it looks like inside our Jefferson Memorial. I have a portrait here of Jefferson, and then a picture of the statue. And you can see that statue today made of bronze, but originally it wasn't bronze because this memorial was built during World War II, when bronze would have been at a premium. It was a kind of metal, and metal went towards the war effort. And so they wouldn't have made the original Jefferson statue out of bronze. It was made out of plaster and painted to look bronze. And so, yeah, that's kind of a fun fact about our Jefferson Memorial. He's got a piece of paper in his hand, which we assume to be the Declaration of Independence because it's the most famous paper that Jefferson wrote. But he did a lot of writing. He wrote a lot of letters. Obviously, he couldn't send emails to his friends. He would have to write letters, and we know he did a lot of that. And we knew he wrote a book called Notes on the State of Virginia. He did a lot of writing. So we're left to kind of ponder what that piece of paper in his hand might be. But most of us agree it's probably intended to be the Declaration of Independence, which is the writing that we find on this back wall behind him here. I think I've put it in here. Yeah, there it is. Perhaps you recognize some of these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's words from our Declaration of Independence. So Jefferson is writing this to tell the folks in Great Britain why the colonists want to be their own country, why they believe they should be independent, that all men are created equal. A pretty famous line that is going to be used by a lot of other famous people who have memorials on the National Mall. We see President Lincoln quoting from this document when he gives his Gettysburg Address, and we see Dr. King quoting from this document when he gives his famous I Have a Dream speech, standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. So these are some pretty lofty ideas, and we're going to get a little bit into that. I wanted to share this because I think it's a really fun idea. This Declaration of Independence was so important to Jefferson that in the midst of World War II, when this memorial opens, it's 1943. It was Jefferson's 200th birthday that the Jefferson Memorial opened. It was April 13th, 1943. On the right-hand side, that's President Franklin Roosevelt, the guy who really pushed for this memorial to get built. So he's really been behind this whole project. So he comes out and he's going to give a short speech that day. And he's going to say it is so important that we're opening this memorial today that we need to have the original Declaration of Independence on site when we open this memorial. Because it was wartime, and this is such a precious document to us, it was in hiding. It wasn't even in where it lives today, the National Archives. It would have been at the Library of Congress before that. And they didn't feel safe leaving it in Washington, D.C. when we were in a time of war. So they had it in hiding. It was down at Fort Knox in Kentucky, and they bring it out. These are Marines who are carrying this heavy case so that the Declaration of Independence could be there at the opening of the Jefferson Memorial in 1943. And I just read this morning. I wasn't aware that it actually stayed for a few days. I thought it was just there for the one day, but it was there for a few days, and people could visit this brand new memorial and actually see the real live Jefferson Memorial, Declaration of Independence. So really wild stuff. If you were with me live and we could go walk around the Jefferson Memorial, one of the things that I often ask students to look for is usually I would stand outside on those steps and I would ask you to think about what you know about Jefferson, and I would say to you to look at certain things, try and figure out maybe what that piece of paper in his hand is, and maybe look for the Declaration of Independence, the words, the actual words. And then I would ask you to look for something that represents Jefferson liked being a farmer. Because Jefferson had a lot of skills and a lot of things that he liked to do. He was a lawyer. He was somebody who loved to write. He loved to read. Told his friend John Adams that he could not live without his books. And he liked to design buildings. The reason our Jefferson Memorial has a dome on the top is because Jefferson always designed buildings with a dome on the top. And so we thought when we're building a memorial to him, we should have a dome on top as well. So he's an architect. He designed buildings. But he was also a farmer, and there's evidence of that kind of hidden away in our Jefferson Memorial. And it's kind of hard to see probably on this image, but I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so you can see. Anybody able to tell me what they see on the back of the statue of Thomas Jefferson that might let us know that he liked being a farmer? Can anybody tell what that is? Ranger Kevin, did you ever look that close behind the statue of Thomas Jefferson to see what's back there?
I have not. This is new for me too.
Oh, very good. What do you think you see back there?
I think it looks like there might be some corn.
There
On the
is some
left side.
corn. Excellent. Didn't know you were going to be put on the spot today, did you? So hopefully you all are screaming this out in your classrooms there. That is corn on the left, and there's a plant on the right that I often say is something we know today isn't very good for us, but made a lot of money for the planters in Virginia. So that crop on the right, yes, is tobacco. Thank you, Ms. Houston. Very nice. Tobacco. So this is examples that's showing us that obviously Jefferson had some kind of interest in farming. And another little tidbit about this memorial and the kind of the symbolism behind it, if you look just above that tobacco, do you notice anything else up here that looks maybe like another symbol of something that would be important to Jefferson? I'm going off on a tangent here, but that's what I do best. Above that tobacco, I like to think, and I think this is a great example about how we have, interpretation in our memorial, in that you might see things differently than they were intended. Yes, Ms. Shaw. Books, it's what I think it looks like. And we know Jefferson loved his books. And so that's kind of what I think of it as. The artist intended it, though, to be the top of a column, like those columns that hold the roof up over the building, because of Jefferson's love of architecture. I'm kind of with you guys, though. I think books makes more sense. Anyway, sidebar. Let's go back to the farming stuff, the corn and the tobacco. Because when we stand here and we look at this and we think about Jefferson being a farmer, I often want to pose the question to students as we're thinking about this. Jefferson may have enjoyed being a farmer, but is Jefferson the person who's out there planting his corn and his tobacco? Is he doing the work on his farm? Who would be doing the work on Jefferson's farm? Do we think it's him? Jefferson lived in Virginia. I don't know if it's a place any of you have had the chance to go visit. Maybe in Maryland, you've had a chance to go down to Charlottesville and see Monticello. It is a pretty cool historic site to visit, and they're telling a lot more of the story nowadays. And yes, it would not have been Jefferson doing his own work there. He would have had enslaved people doing the work on his farm. So when we think about this and the idea that Jefferson had enslaved people on his property, it makes us look back on that wall at the Declaration of Independence and think about the idea that he wrote the words, "All men are created equal." I don't know if I have any girls in the group here, but I often get critiques about that. Why did he say all men are created equal? And why did he leave out half of the population? There's quite a few people missing from his all men are created equal when we think about it. And it's really hard to understand like this idea that he could say these words and mean them, but then not live up to that ideal. And I've had a lot of students recently coming to the memorial who are even surprised that we would have a memorial to someone like Thomas Jefferson because he wrote those words, but clearly didn't live up to those high ideals. And so it becomes a really tricky topic. And as we approach this time with the anniversary, the 250 years of the Declaration of Independence coming up in 2026, when we're thinking back to 1776 and this big anniversary, it's really tricky to understand how he could write these amazing words that have meant so much to so many people, but yet he himself doesn't live up to it. And there's a whole another group. There are lots of groups of people who are not included in his ideal of all men are created equal and living at the time that Jefferson was living. So I feel like we should maybe take another perspective on this and look at it from another person who had some thoughts on Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. I'm going to pass it to Ranger Kevin to let us know a little bit about someone he has spent a lot of time learning about.
So farming is a lot of work, no matter who you are, no matter what time period you live in. It takes a lot of time and energy if you're going to successfully run a farm. Now, today's farmers have still a lot of work, but a lot of technology and tools and equipment that don't make it easy, but maybe make it a little bit easier in terms of the amount of people that would need to be involved. As you've been hearing about Jefferson's love of farming and agriculture, Ranger Jen's reminding us that he may be a farmer, he may love farming and benefit from it, but he himself is not probably doing very much of the actual farming with the physical tasks that go into it when you don't have the big tractors and things like we're used to nowadays, when you just need somebody on their hands and knees in the dirt, and you need a lot of somebody's. So we want to pivot our story here for a moment and share you a point of view from one of those people who unfortunately grew up doing that work. A man named Frederick Douglass, who you see pictured here on the side of the screen. And on the other side is the house that he's going to be living in Washington, D.C. at the end of his life. It's a pretty nice house. It's a pretty comfortable house, but life hasn't always been that way for Frederick Douglass. See, if we take him from kind of the old man that we see pictured here back to a young boy Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. And as one who was enslaved, he wasn't allowed to make decisions about his own life. Other people tried constantly to tell him everything that he had to do. And he could say no. But unfortunately, that often meant there was pretty bad consequences. And I don't just mean like he got in trouble. There was some really, really awful things that would happen when those who were enslaved tried to say no. For Frederick Douglass, he spends the first 20 years of his life enslaved, being forced to work for other people, where he is beaten, he is starved, he is ripped apart from his family. He has life absolutely awful. And the whole time he's in that environment, his commitment is that this is wrong. Slavery has always been wrong, and slavery will always be wrong. So, two of his main priorities are number one, how do I get out of this? How do I get myself out of slavery? And the other, just as important question, maybe even more important for him, is how do we destroy slavery permanently? How can we be in a nation created by such smart people, and yet this idea that human beings can own human beings has become just kind of normal? You know, it's not normal for us, I hope. But in the time that Frederick Douglass and Thomas Jefferson lived in, it seemed normal. That doesn't mean it was okay, though. Frederick Douglass knew it should never have been normal. It should have never been okay, and it needs to be destroyed. So, as we look at his view, you can imagine he might be bringing some different perspectives into a conversation about independence than even someone brilliant like Thomas Jefferson would. I want to look at a few specific excerpts of Frederick Douglass's life, some words that he spoke on this very subject. And it's going to be words that he spoke when he was in his 30s. You see, when Frederick Douglass escapes slavery, he becomes this powerful speaker who travels this nation telling people that slavery is wrong. And in the time period that we're talking about, this is what Frederick Douglass looked like right here. Did you know that Frederick Douglass is the single most photographed human being to have ever lived in the history of the human race up to that moment in time? He uses photographs as a powerful weapon. This is one taken of him in the early 1850s. When this photograph is taken, he has lived 20 years in slavery, but he's now out. When he got out, he became this powerful speaker who traveled this planet, selling out stadiums with crowds of, thousands coming to hear him day after day. He has also published a book about himself where he revealed his whole life story and he told the United States of America what slavery is. He revealed everything. And doing this is so brave, but also so dangerous. When Frederick Douglass publishes his book, he has to flee the country because slavery, sadly, though it's evil, slavery had become normal for many people. So by telling his story, he's now in danger. He flees the country. Eventually, he comes back to America, launches his own newspaper called the North Star, named for that star that guided so many to freedom. And by the 1850s, Frederick Douglass became the most dominant voice in America, telling everyone slavery is wrong and it must be destroyed. That is what brings us into the moment in time we see him pictured here. He takes to a stage in 1852 in Rochester, New York, to share some of his thoughts on what the 4th of July means. 4th of July, that big day from Jefferson and others, where they're signing the Declaration of Independence, Independence Day for us. We hear about it many ways through the eyes of Jefferson, Washington, Adams, and those heroes of the past. For Frederick Douglass, he's wondering, what does the 4th of July mean in my experience? And so I'm going to read you just a few little pieces of some of his speech. Just encourage you to listen closely to what he's saying as he's standing on July 1852, talking about what independence means to him. He opens his speech very simply with what we'd be expecting. The purpose of our celebration is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This to you is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. If you've been listening close, I hope you've already started to catch a little bit of the language that he's using. His words are very on purpose here. No word that Frederick Douglass is saying here, no word that I'm reading to you is an accident. He's discussing liberty, he's discussing freedom and independence. But note what you are hearing specifically if, as we continue reading more of his, you hear Frederick Douglass saying, I, me, or we? Or is he saying in this speech, you and yours? Is he taking ownership of this 4th of July, or is he telling other people that it's yours? That's what I want you to listen for very closely as we hear a little bit more. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you therefore may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your undeveloped destiny. Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were great men. They were great enough to give fame to a great age. It does not happen often to a nation to raise at one time such a number of truly great men. The point from which I am compelled to view them is not certainly the most favorable. And yet, I cannot contemplate what they did without great admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and I will unite with you to honor their memory. He's celebrating these heroes of the past. He's not saying they were wrong, he's saying smart people, worthy of respect, worthy of celebration, worthy of remembrance. This all tracks for what we would expect at a big 4th of July event. But as we keep going, the yous and yours and theirs that he's talking about, they're really about to change. Let's keep going for a minute. Another paragraph. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom, natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us? The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that has brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. Saying, among other things, it's brought stripes and death to him. And just to be clear, stripes. Some of you may already be making these connections on us, and I hope that we are. With stripes, he's talking about the bruises, the scars, the whippings, the beatings, as the very things that you celebrate as independence wasn't independence for everybody. Exactly getting to what Ranger Jen was sharing with us as she was finishing up her section. All men are created equal. As imperfect as that is, it's not even all men. That's some of what Douglass is highlighting here. A lot of people are suffering at the hands of this nation still after even those words were written. Douglass continues explaining his point here. He uses a word called fetters, kind of like chains, and it says, to drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems. This is inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Some big words here. But then he continues, do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me here to speak? Above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the shouts which reach them. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember these bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. Remember part of the difference that we've heard from our introduction to Thomas Jefferson, the great gifts that he left our nation through his schoolwork, his presidency, his contributions to the conversations. But remember also his love of farming and those who actually did the farming for him. That's some of what Frederick Douglass is talking about here. Not just Thomas Jefferson, but all those in a system like this. Those who continue bleeding, those who continue experiencing pain. The mournful wail of millions, millions of enslaved, who, when Douglass is giving these words, remain in slavery, still trying to fight their way out. Douglass is not saying directly what's going on here. He's not saying the slaves. But it would be hard not to really wrap your mind around what he's talking about for the people who are sitting in those chairs hearing him talk. Whose chains is he speaking of? He once had chains on his body, though not anymore. Many others do. And so he continues with maybe the most poignant moment of all here as I kind of draw us to the conclusion of a final few words of his. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license. Your national greatness is swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality are hollow mockery. This is mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. Douglass has a lot of strong opinions on this. And remember how personal he must feel this as well. He's not just looking from the outside and saying that clearly slavery is wrong. This is a face, these are eyes looking right into us right now, who experienced all of its horror, who suffered the pain and the trauma and the starvations and never knowing who his parents were and all that stuff because of this system. So much of it finding its origins as he gazes back in it, in those words of Jefferson that Ranger Jen was starting to share with us. And Douglass himself even discusses that in this speech. This picture of Jefferson's signature there on our Declaration of Independence. Douglass wraps up this little conversation by adding, you declare before the world that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in bondage millions, which, according to Jefferson, is worse than the ages that your fathers rose in a rebellion to oppose. He's saying Jefferson said slavery was worse than the reasons the Declaration of Independence was even launched. And yet Jefferson seemingly knew it was wrong, but couldn't quite live that way. Douglass, by no choice of his own, found himself emerging into life as one in this system that was wrong, suffering from it. And what his call seems to be to us is that America knows better. We all knew it's wrong. We all know it's wrong. The difference isn't do you know right and wrong? The difference is do you do that which is right? And do you try to get rid of that which is wrong? So for Frederick Douglass, what is independence? It's really, really complicated. It's ugly, and it's full of a lot of things that don't make sense. Frederick Douglass, on this moment in 1852, is sharing the truths that he sees as self evident. And in so doing, he's calling back to this generation that let freedom ring, that when they let freedom ring, it might not have been a bad idea to pick up the phone sometimes and actually hear what it had to say. Because I think maybe in this moment, Frederick Douglass was on the other end of the line, trusting, hoping, and believing that one day the future would likewise choose a better path, that they would continue resonating with driving forward. So, what I would encourage you to think about as we kind of open up this thing for comments, for thoughts, for questions, hearing what you've heard in this moment of Thomas Jefferson on one side, Frederick Douglass on another, both very extremely important people in American history who both did amazing things and who both did things that maybe weren't that great. If they were in a room together, what kind of conversations do you think they might have? How might they have interacted around each other? Folks who both impact you and I right now, and who both have a lot to say about independence, about freedom, about liberty, about what the United States of America has been, is now, and what it should be. There's a lot that they would agree on, but I think there's a lot they would disagree on too. And I'd love as we kind of leave that seed there planting with you, feel free to ask questions, type things in. I want to open up the floor for us about anything. Give you a few moments to think about your conversations in your classrooms, and if you want to, type some of those in here for either Ranger Jen or myself.
I don't know about you all, but hearing his words and looking in his face was really was really powerful to hear his words and have him looking at us was really something. Well played.
That's one of the very unique things that Frederick Douglass did. And every single one of you, I'm sure, has no doubt, you've taken many, many pictures, or other people have taken pictures of you. We all, for the most part, look in the camera when we're taking yearbook photos, things like that. Did you know that before Frederick Douglass, almost nobody actually looked in the camera? They all kind of, like kind of looked off to the side. You didn't actually look at it. Frederick Douglass makes eye contact with the camera because he wants you to see his picture and look him in the eyes and try to tell him that he is not a man, that he is not a person, that he does not have value. So basically, he invented the selfie, as far as I'm concerned. So for all y'all who take selfies, now this is the man who started it all. Just some of these photographs of him here behind me. Not quite totally fair for Jefferson because he didn't have photographs quite in his time. It's a new technology there, but we do still have paintings and things. So how are we feeling? What thoughts we having? Questions, feedback, pushback? I know it's a lot to take in. This is a deep subject, but an important one as we encroach in on the 250th anniversary of this nation. We're not the first people to have these conversations, and you better believe we're not the last ones. But it's still important that we have these conversations.
I wish we could have heard Frederick Douglass give one of those speeches.
That would be pretty amazing.
Just to imagine what his tone of voice would have been. I mean, Yeah. I feel that way about Lincoln too. Yeah.
And this is something that applies even in a way to Jefferson and those of his generation. Is nowadays we have movies, we have podcasts, all these things that can entertain us and keep us going. But for speakers like Frederick Douglass and others, when they go in, they are talking sometimes for over an hour straight, and sometimes more than 1 hour. And I don't know about you, but for me at least, there's not a lot of people that I would want to listen to just talk for over an hour endlessly. And the people that could do that, like Frederick Douglass, they have to have been amazing to be able to pull that off and keep us not, bored, keep us focused in it. Someone once said that Frederick Douglass could make you laugh or cry when he decided to make you laugh or cry. He's able to use
Wow.
this emotion in here. So there's a power there that we don't really know too much about. Maybe like your favorite movie or something that really, with the music going and everything that really kind of gets your emotions going. Maybe that's kind of a way that we can compare. It's a great question about Douglas's voice in here that we see if we have any AI generated ones. Nothing that exists from his voice has survived. So anything that's kind of out there is other people putting their spin on it. But all we have, unfortunately, is just like descriptions of it. We do know, in relation to the follow up question here, did he have a Southern accent? He did not. That part of how we know that is that became a problem for him when he first started going on these big tours and talking about what life was like as someone who had been enslaved. There were many people in his audience who believed he was an actor, that he was faking his stories about being enslaved because they said he didn't sound like they thought a person who was enslaved should sound like. So in those folks' view, basically they're like, you talk too well to be who you say you are. And one of his close allies even tells him this is bad. But one of his close allies asks him, can you put a little more plantation in how you talk? Basically, can you just sound like what I think a slave is supposed to sound like? It's really wrong to do that stuff. But so he seemed to have a very clear, strong voice, as best we understand. His entire slavery was spent in Maryland.
Maybe for some of our younger people who may not be too familiar with him, how about the fact that how he becomes educated? It's kind of an interesting story and one that wouldn't have happened for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. So Jefferson has one track into education, and he makes the most of the pathway that he is able to use and becomes this brilliant mind of writing and publishing books and, helping the Library of Congress become what we know it as. And Jefferson puts his education to amazing use and revolutionizes our nation because of it. Douglass also is yearning for that same education. He unfortunately is going to have to kind of pull it out of himself. He manages in time when he's about 8 years old to start tricking some of the people who are enslaving him to begin teaching him things without them always realizing what they're teaching him and the power of what they're teaching him. He's just a young boy for us. He should be like somebody in a third grade classroom, just down the hall from where some of us are. And he realizes there's something very, very powerful about letters, about reading, about writing. And if it wasn't so powerful to learn to read, then everybody would be being taught how to read immediately. What is so dangerous? So at the age of 8, he starts this journey learning the alphabet very cleverly, often in disguise when people aren't realizing what he's doing. And one of his very subtle tricks, he doesn't get a lot of food, but when he gets food, he's going to take it out. This is in the streets of Baltimore. He's going to trade that food to some of the other poor white boys that are around him. He gives them his food, and in exchange, they teach him sounds. They teach him how to put words together. They teach him how to write. So he's trading his bread for kind of the bread of knowledge, because he will say, once you learn to read, you are forever free. And now he knows the single greatest tool that anyone in America can ever have is the ability to read, and then to use that knowledge to continue reading. Because if you can read, you can already change the world. And you already know in your heart what's fair and what's not fair. Now you can put pen to paper or pencil down there and you can begin sharing with the world exactly why things are the way they are and the way you want them to be. He saw nothing special in himself. He learned to read, and with no classroom time, he became one of the most brilliant minds to have ever lived in our nation. But sheer determination to get on that same level. It's a reminder that anything's possible for us. All is possible.
And a reminder that how lucky you are to be able to go to school and be able to learn how to read and have the opportunity. We sometimes have to think about it in terms of people who maybe don't have that opportunity or didn't have that experience. I know we think about Lincoln a lot, talking about how he maybe got to spend a year in school, but did a lot of learning on his own. He would have loved the chance to go to school more regularly. And so Douglass would have been the same, right?
And think about, I'm sure some of your schools have a library inside of them. Think about how powerful that room is. Thomas Jefferson had a library. We can still see it today because of some of the sacrifices and the decisions that he made. Frederick Douglass had a library. We can still see it today, again, because of those same sacrifices and things that survive. They both knew that reading is a very important step, but reading everything we can expands our options, expands our potential. And so when you go into a library, don't just think of it as a cool place for books. Think about in those books are a lot of ideas. And we should always be thinking about ideas of how we make the world a better place, ideas of how we ignite our curiosity, our imaginations, our skills, how you become the best student that you know you can be by getting that book that appeals to you, by returning books so other students can get same ideas and things that benefited you from. Libraries aren't just fun places. They are that. But once upon a time, there were millions of people who could have never even dreamt about having a single book, let alone all these unlimited interlibrary loans and things that we can go, or now ebooks. You have the knowledge of humanity at your fingertips, in part because of these two folks. Think about that next time you're walking down the hall or when you see your librarian. Remember how important school librarians are in this work. Not everybody had that same access. But is that not a piece of independence? Independence of our minds, of our thoughts, of our educations for all.
Great stuff. Nobody has any questions about anything? Anything about Douglass? That very first picture, you saw the house that Douglass lived the last part of his life at, and that's where Ranger Kevin works. You can go to DC and you can visit his house and tour and see his books, right? His books are still there.
Yeah. I'm curious though too, because I know some of you are in some classrooms and typing in things isn't always the easiest. I'm curious if you can kind of do a quick little show of hands, maybe in your classroom at least, and see, have more of you visited the Jefferson Memorial, or have more of you visited the Frederick Douglass house, or has no one been to anything? Curious if we have anybody who's been to either of our locations, since we have some folks who are somewhat local-ish within a couple hours. Has anybody in any classroom been to one or the other, or maybe both?
You know, too, that both of us offer field trips at either of these places, or even both. We've talked about doing a combination field trip. So if you ever wanted to come to DC and combine these stories, lot of you know, language skills can be garnered by thinking about what these gentlemen wrote and their speeches. Well, Jefferson was more of a writer than a speaker, and Douglass did it both, right? I mean, well known for his speeches, but writing as well.
Before you can give the speech, you have to write the speech.
Yeah, right.
And not only do we do in-person field trips, we are also both open as well to virtual field trips and things as well for settings like this, where if you want to see us at a specific monument or inside of the home, we can work things out in that way too to get a little more one-on-one into the details. So do not hesitate. This is what we're here for.
I have had the great pleasure of going to the Douglas house on a Ranger Kevin tour, and I would definitely recommend the experience if you have the chance to come down and visit sometime. I don't know if you're going to get an answer to your question. Maybe we don't have people who have visited. Put this on your list. You've got
That's
holiday
fair.
vacation coming up, right? There's some chance maybe to come visit some sites.
And
Give
so
you
as
one
we're
last
wrapping up
chance.
with our, oh,
Yeah, go.
so would like to be
Awesome.
excellent. Yeah.
Let us know if you're coming this way.
And it's especially poignant as we kind of begin concluding our time here, just to reemphasize a point that I made earlier. And I think Ranger Jen did as well. A few that have visited the Jefferson Memorial. Yeah. The Douglas House is
Oh,
kind of hard to
good.
get to because it's by itself. But again, it's that important thing of, finding these different voices in our stories, finding everything that makes American history and trying to bring it together. We're not trying to sit here and say one person is right and one person is wrong. We're trying to say, based on where they've come from, what they've experienced, what informed their views, how did they get to the place they did, and maybe we read things into that, and we may lean one way or another, but we're not trying to say this person's all bad. People, just like us, are complex. There's a lot that motivates us. There's a lot that pushes us. And maybe there's things deep down we do that we wouldn't always want other people to know about. When you're a super famous historical figure, though, you don't get to have that same sort of privacy. And it continues. People find every little detail that you did here. But this is the sort of thing that we lean into because this country is just about to turn 250 years old. That's a long time. That's a long time. And a lot of people have come and gone in those years. And a lot of us are here right now, still debating the questions that they laid out. What does it mean that all men are created equal and that they have these certain unalienable rights? And if it is that clear, even if the wording is not perfect, if it is that clear, why has it been such a problem all along that after 250 years, we're still talking about it? And maybe we've gotten there. Maybe we haven't. That's up for each of us. Kind of look at it from our own life perspectives in here. So keep your eyes peeled as we move into the next couple of years, because I think these sorts of conversations are only going to continue getting bigger and bigger as we hit that July 4th, 2026 moment, 250 years after the Declaration is first signed.
It's something that we've been thinking about a long time because when you think of 4th of July and you think of the National Mall, it tends to give off party atmosphere because the mall is known for its big fireworks show, and it's kind of a celebration of our independence. But yet when I hear, Douglas's words, it's hard to always think of it as a celebration. And so, what should marking this 250th anniversary, what should it look like? Should it be celebratory and should it be a party, or should it be a little bit more than that, where we, make sure to consider some of those people and those voices who weren't always heard? It's a really complicated story, our country's history, isn't it? Well, thanks for taking this ride with us, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I'll throw out a last, if you have any quick questions. I know we've been talking about some deep stuff, but if you have anything that you really want to know about either the Jefferson or the Douglas site, or anything about this independence idea, by all means. Yes, please let us know if we can do anything and answer any more questions for you. Happy Friday, everybody. It's Friday. You putting your info in there?
I was
Oh,
throwing
thank you
in
very much.
both of our emails in there. Folks want to reach out
Good.
to either of us or to both of us. That's the most direct
Yeah.
way to get in touch with either Ranger Jen or myself. Whatever you want, we'll make it work.
Yeah, very good. Major Kevin, thank you for joining me again. It was really nice talking to you. I always appreciate hearing you talk. And when you talk about somebody and listening for an hour, I feel like I could listen to you for an hour. No problem.
Oh, thank you. And thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you all very much for joining us. And thank you again to the Trust for setting us all up on this. Hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks.